Hello, good afternoon, and welcome to Books and Beer live on a Wednesday afternoon for me in the UK. It's Wednesday morning for you, isn't it, David, over the pond,
Yes,
wherever
it
you
is.
might be?
10 a.m. in the mountains of Santa Fe.
Oh, wow, that sounds beautiful.
Yeah.
Are are you into your sort of mountain climbing then, hiking up mountains, or do you just like looking at them from
Not
the
so
window?
much. Mostly, I just want to look at them. I'll do a little hiking, but definitely don't want to climb anything. My
Yeah.
co-author, Sean Ellis, and I, one of my co-authors, did an adventure race a couple of years ago, and that just destroyed me. But hey, it prompted me to lose 50 pounds, so it ended up
Uh,
being good. But yeah, if I don't have to climb anything too steep, I won't.
Yeah, yeah. I love outdoor stuff, and as you say, steep, nothing too steep. I won't enjoy. But for me, navigation is the problem. I want to follow a path that's clearly marked,
Mhm.
and if I've got to go, I've got to deviate or look at a map or work something out. Oh, that's quite difficult.
Yeah, when I was a kid, I was in Boy Scouts, and one of our trips, they took us out in the middle of the forest, gave us a compass and a topographical sheet, and said, "Okay, find your way back," and they left us. We made it eventually, but it was a challenge.
2 weeks later, yeah, with half the people missing.
Yeah.
Brilliant. So you have written many books with many different people, haven't you? Just to
Yeah.
even look at your
I'm too lazy to do my
bibliography
own
is.
work, so I
Mm,
just work with co-authors. Yeah, I think I have a lot of novellas also and short novels, but I think I have 45 in sort of the expanded Dane Maddock universe, and a lot of those are co-authored. And then I have 8 with my friend Alan Baxter, and I have maybe 10 under a pen name, some fantasy and some sci-fi under a couple of pen names. And then I have 3 under an old pulp adventure series. I think that might be it. So yeah, I'm probably pushing 70 at
gosh,
this point. But again, a lot of those are short novellas, 25, 30,000 words.
yeah, wow. When was your first one? What was the first story then, and how did you come about jumping into writing that first story?
I waited until I was in my mid 30s to even start writing. I had dreamed about it as a kid, and I just got into my head that that was not the sort of thing that regular people ever managed to achieve. So I just didn't bother to try for the longest time, but the itch never left me. So I got into working on a fantasy novel through the SFF online writing workshop. But then I was working my way through that and getting really bored. And I heard about National Novel Writing Month. People call it NaNoWriMo for short. And around that same time, I learned about a company called Lulu, which would publish a paperback very inexpensively, which then was the only way you could independently publish. And I had an idea for an adventure novel. So I wrote one, put it out, and the damn thing sold a little bit. And the problem was it was poorly edited, poorly formatted, ugly cover. I just figured my family would buy it. And so I wrote it and put it out. I'm like, I kind of like writing adventures. So I wrote another one and that sold. And then about the time I was starting on my third one, the Kindle revolution came about, or Kindle came about. And so I was one of the first in the door for all of those and took off. So 2004 was when I first officially published. Started working full time in 2011.
Wow, 2004. So you're knocking on the 20-year thing in 2 years'
Yeah,
time.
it's hard to believe. It doesn't feel like that at
Wow.
all.
Yeah. So you've seen a massive change in the sort of author space, haven't you, over that period of time
Oh,
then?
it's Yes. The big change is, of course, that paperback used to be the only way to go, and it was still very expensive to do that. Ebooks, there was a company called Fiction Wise that if you were very lucky, you could get into. That was the only ebook distributor. Kindle didn't exist. Smart devices didn't exist. So yeah, everything has changed. There's a lot more money in it now. Back then, a successful quarter, I would be able to pay the electric bill. And that changed pretty rapidly with Kindle. But on the other side, the stupid things that authors do to promote themselves have not changed at all. People are still promoting themselves in the comment sections and the reviews of other people's books and things like that. So the space has changed, but it's the same in some ways.
Yeah, long may it continue. Buy my book, etc. We need to talk about what you're drinking because being a massive disappointment today, and I'll tell you why
Yeah.
about that in a minute. But what's that you just took a sip from?
This is called Social Hour. It is from the Santa Fe Brewing Company, local, and it's heavy on citrus. I
It
think
looks
it's an
nice.
IPA. I just picked
It
something that
looks like
looked
an
fun and that I
IPA.
could tolerate at 10 a.m.
Yeah.
I can't remember the last time I drank in the morning, probably college. That
I'm
was a
so
lot.
impressed with you, and equally slightly disappointed in myself because I have a glass of water now.
That's
I'll
cool.
tell you
You can have
why.
two next time we talk.
Absolutely, I'll drink for both of us next time, and hopefully in real life at some point, at some conference or another. But
Absolutely. You come over here, we got room. The kids are out of the house.
oh, fantastic! Well, I met
We're a
up
one
with
so good.
I went for a beer with another author, Stephen Taylor, who's been on the show a couple of times.
Mhm.
Yesterday, he lives about 100 miles away. We met in a town midway, and it was just one of those meeting at midday and sort of having 5 or 6 pints over the course of the afternoon. So I woke up this morning and thought, you know what, I probably shouldn't have a beer today. So anyway, there we are.
Yeah. I think you probably had Nick Thacker on the show. I know you had Tumlinson, and they're in the same circle. He loves to host people up in Colorado Springs. He has all these craft breweries that he works out of.
Oh, lovely.
So it's fun to make the drive up there and hang with him and whichever authors he can gather. There's several in the circle that live within driving distance of the Springs.
That sounds like so much fun. Yeah,
It is
absolutely.
a lot of fun.
So we've got a few people in the comments have said hello. Alison says hi to Luke and David. Where is she? There we are.
Up, Allison.
Ray says 20 years seems like so far back nowadays.
Oh, not Ray again. He's trouble. Got to watch him. But he will print your books for you if you need it. He's good. He
is great editor, great supporter of independent authors like us. And he says, "Did you get smashed with Stephen Taylor?" Tisk tisk. Not smashed. I don't think smash would describe it. Just probably 5 beers more than is appropriate before close of play on a.
I read that as smashed with Steven Tyler, and I was really impressed for a minute.
That would be good, wouldn't it?
Oh, we lived there too. Yeah.
Of Aerosmith fame, is that who you mean? Mm-hmm. Rob Radcliffe, how are you, my friend? Hi, fellas. So you've been writing all these books for several years, as we talked about a moment ago. Have you found? Because this interests me from my own sort of practice, that your method of writing has changed over that period. Because I feel like it changes every time I sit down and write a book. Sure. What worked last time doesn't work anymore, and I have to figure it out all over again.
I do. And sometimes it will change up and I'll not necessarily backslide, but I'll go back to old techniques. But I've definitely gone from a pure pantser, which is what we call just fly by the seat of your pants, sit down and start writing the book, to more of an outliner. When I collaborate with another author, you had Alan Baxter on the show last week, and we've done a lot of books together. We discuss it a lot. We kick around. I have a pitch document that I send him, but then I do a very thorough chapter by chapter outline. Sometimes it'll be 15,000 words by the time he gets it. It'll be synopses, links, bits of dialogue that I definitely like put in, and he takes it from there. So I do a form of that with my own books, but sometimes I just say the hell with it and I sit down and start writing. The last novella I wrote just came out like that. I just wrote it.
Yeah. Do you think it's quicker when you've got that outline or when you've done that pre-work?
It all depends. If I write myself into a corner, then yes, the outline was quicker. If I don't, then no, the outline took longer. Yeah. I will invariably make some changes to the outline anyway.
That's how I've done it as well. I've got halfway through and thought, actually, what was I thinking? That doesn't work. Or I don't like that idea now. I need to change
the big time saver for me is to get as much research done ahead of time as I can, because that's where my new ideas and my new links and my new connections pop up. I'll have a place that I plan on using, and then I'll find out there's a sculpture or a piece of artwork or an ancient legend about the place or a famous figure associated with it that fits nicely with the plot I've already created, as if I had intended to do that. So obviously I have to put it in. But that can require a lot of backfilling if you're working from a manuscript rather than just an outline.
Because this is it. I've read one of your books, one of the Dane Maddock ones, and loved it. A really fun, fast-paced adventure sort of style. But there is that sort of historical element to it, isn't it? They're discovering something. This one, they were chasing a manuscript signed by one of the ex-presidents or something, something like that, and it was lost to the sands of time and whatever.
Origin stories, I think.
Yeah, it was good fun. But I mean, how much sort of artistic license do you give yourself with something like that? Or is it quite close to what you've researched to be true? What's your...
Okay. I try to go with authentic legends as much as I can, and authentic artifacts, at least that the conspiracy theorists believe in. You can go pretty far researching those conspiracy theories. You don't have to make up a whole lot more. But on rare occasion, I have a novelette in the final editing stages right now, and I just made up the artifact for that. But the legend is an actual one. So I try to do is give it as much authenticity as I can and try to use actual places as much as I can. I think that makes it a lot more fun for the reader. And in some cases, it ends up being a place they would like to visit later.
Mm.
Even if it's just a matter of my characters need to have a conversation and reveal information, I'll find a really, really awesome pub or restaurant they can go to that has its own history and decor just to make the whole thing a little more interesting while they do it.
That's such a good idea, actually. Sort of putting them, because sometimes those conversations can be a bit slow, can't they? If they're just discussing something, but putting them in an interesting place brings that scene to life, I think.
Yeah, put them in a pub that's really cool. Look up. I like to use TripAdvisor and get actual reviews of things, and have them order a unique dish, and you interrupt the conversation to take a bite of this, and use the five senses. Do it with your drinks, with your beer, for example,
Yeah.
things like that.
Love it, love it, love it. Does this give you a great opportunity to go to these places and see them? Because I'm big into travel and seeing the places that I set my books.
Yes, but sometimes I've been known to go there after the fact and find out if I fucked it up or not. Oh, excuse me.
No,
Oh,
don't
okay,
worry.
good. Sorry, I used to be a teacher, but I've been full-time writing for 11 years, and it doesn't matter how I talk anymore. And my
Yeah,
kids are old.
they know all the words. Yeah,
So, 20 and 27, yeah, I can talk
you'd
how I
hope so.
want.
Yeah,
Yeah, but yeah, some places the trip inspires the story, and in other places the research inspires it, and then I end up in that place. Like the first time I went to New York City, I went and visited all the places that I had used in a Maddock book. But then I was also able to use future sites. Like Alan and I did a meetup in New York City a few years ago. He had gone to a horror writers thing, and excuse me, we ended up wandering the city doing some of the standard tourist stuff. But we also did things like we weren't supposed to be there, but we ended up in a reception at the Grolier Club, Grolier encyclopedias and all that,
right. Yeah,
with Chip Delaney, Samuel R. Delaney, the sci-fi author, was there, and we ended up just hanging with him. And we're like, I hope nobody notices we're not actually supposed to be in here. But we ended up using the Grolier Club in our stories, and a lot of in a Jake Crowley adventure is the series we were working on. So yeah, sometimes you just wander and you find cool things. You're like, okay, I'm going to find a way to use this, and that's a lot of
yeah.
fun.
I think you're right, and I think you can't always know. I think that maybe both in the historical sense and in the place itself, you can't always know quite what it's going to be before you've, looked around for a bit, can you? Found those great little backstreet bars that people could hang out in, as you say, or that little alleyway that they could have run down to escape from whoever's chasing them, or whatever the sort of story might be.
Yeah, we found an amazing speakeasy that had a giant vault in it. I'm talking, it was probably 12 feet tall, big round door standing open, and they turned it into this luxurious speakeasy. And it was just amazing. I don't remember if we worked it in, but we took a lot of photos and took notes and had a drink. And
Have you ever found then you've been to a place and which you've written about and you weren't happy about how you wrote about it in the book? You thought, I just haven't captured this as I'd hoped. Or have you always been, oh, that's fine, I can do it,
I write pulp adventures, and so I never go into great depth. I'm not Robert
Yeah,
Jordan describing a tapestry for a page and a half or anything like that. I always think that I could do better with description. I don't think I'm super strong in that area. I want to give you a touch of the five senses. I want you to feel like you've been there and that you've got a vibe. And I want you to be curious about looking the place up. But I think I'm probably not super strong at doing that. But I don't think I've ever visited a place and felt like I made a complete botch of it. I
yeah,
generally did okay. But I do, like I said, TripAdvisor is great. I watch YouTube videos of the place. Sometimes I'll make discoveries in the YouTube videos. You can add authenticity just by, you're going down a stairwell and there's a sign that's oddly phrased, and you make sure the character notices that. That way, anybody who's been to that place will be like, whoa, that little sign, he's really been here. Well, no, I haven't, but YouTube has.
yeah. It's amazing, isn't it, being an author in the 21st century with things
It's
like
crazy.
YouTube
I couldn't have done it back in the day. I'm too lazy.
yeah. You'd have just set them all in Santa Fe. They'd have just been.
Yep. No, it's just been done by many people.
Well,
The Santa Fe version of Midsummer Murders, the New Mexico murders.
yeah, that's it. The New Mexico murders. I like it. I like it. No one would want to visit. They think they were going to die within 2 weeks of living there.
Well, in Albuquerque, you might. Only if
Oh,
you
really?
stay away from the police and you'll be safe. Sorry,
Right.
my wife works in law enforcement. They have a reputation.
Fair enough. You know better than I do. Are all your books then? I should know this, but I don't. Are they all set in the present or in at the time they were written, or have you done some
Almost
set
all
in
of them.
future or past
I
times?
have I have a series called the Brockstone Adventures, and that is more of a Doc Savage thing. Right now, we're in late 20s, early 30s. I think I'm working on some backstory stuff that's in the late 20s, and then the main adventures are happening around, I think we're up to around 1931, 1932 with those. And that's interesting because you can allude to actual historical events
Mm.
and you can add authentic lingo and stuff like that. But it's also a lot of work. You have to really watch for contradictions. And then one of the challenges is you check to see if certain technology existed, but then sometimes you might confirm that technology existed, but the readers just assumed it didn't, and they just assume you got it wrong. But that's my one thing that's set in the past. And then I have a science fiction series under the name Finn Gray that's futuristic.
Okay, so you've gone both sides, one in the future,
Yep.
one in the
But the main
past.
thing is contemporary stuff.
Yeah.
Although I sometimes fantasize about just doing everything in the 80s back before we had cell phones and just staying there in comic book universe and not ever moving forward in time.
I do
But I think
find in
that would
my
be
I do find in my books, and I've written so many less than you, but I've found that cell phones can be a bit of an issue because they just make it easy to do the thing that you're. Oh, I need to know where someone is. Just call them. Oh, there they are. Or track their phone or whatever the technology is. You know what I mean? So half the challenge is
yeah.
breaking it or making there no signal or whatever. There's always some way that phone has to be out of use, isn't there, for the story to
Yeah.
actually work?
Fortunately, living in the American Southwest has taught me that there are still plenty of places where you can't get a cell phone signal. If our internet is out, I can't get a cell phone signal
Right.
here at my
Okay.
house. There's maybe one carrier where you can stand in one corner of our property and maybe get a single bar. And that's true for a lot of the places out here. Well, I just had to travel through Texas last week to pick up my daughter, and yeah, there are stretches where there's just nothing. So put them
Are you
underground, which is where a lot of ancient things are hidden in my stories, and you're not going to get a signal. But yeah, just the availability of stuff online. Matthew Riley, who's a terrific thriller author, one of his books, I think it was Seven Deadly Warriors. It was entertaining, but it was just basically a series of escapes where all the ancient mysteries were solved on a computer in between action scenes. They hop on a plane, they're flying, and they're going, oh, guess what, guys? Solved another one. Let's go get this. And so I try to avoid that. But also sometimes I'll remind the readers that just because knowledge exists somewhere does not mean that someone has put it onto an online database
Mm.
and cataloged it in a way that it can be found. So there's still plenty of knowledge out there to be discovered. But you do have to put some thought into what would logically be achieved with a cell phone and what wouldn't.
Yeah, exactly. And I think now in the modern era, the question isn't finding the source. The question is which source is reliable and which isn't. Like you can find information on anything you want, but most of it's rubbish. So you've got to try and find the thing that's right, haven't you? Like in an older story, you might be searching for as your story a manuscript somewhere, and that's the thing, isn't it? But now you've got shitloads of manuscripts. It's just finding the one that actually, proving that one's right or whatever it might be, however that might work out.
Absolutely.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, it's fascinating stuff. What are the challenges then of writing one set in the future? And how much did you think about? Is it a sort of a dystopian future, or is it an
No,
off-planet
I say
sci-fi future?
It's more of a Battlestar Galactica thing. It's not on Earth, although I am beginning to plant Easter eggs to my other series within that sci-fi, using some of the same surnames and crossing over some of the mythology. I think the challenge for me was just learning like how specific to be in space fighter battles and things
Mm,
like that. There's a physics of what can actually explode and what will show up, and where am I going to fudge for the sake of awesomeness, and where am I going to cleave to
yeah,
the actual authentic thing.
but
And
I
then thinking
think
about, what's the role of religion in a future society as opposed to academia? Because we even see now, we, in a very short period of time, have gone from what felt like a very progressive place to, I mean, we're convincing people to, well, I don't need it'll smack of political. But yeah, we're rejecting some very fundamental common sense knowledge that rapidly increased the human lifespan only a century ago, and we're suddenly rejecting it because we're so easily manipulated. So yeah, that's a question. People are always going to be stupid no matter how smart technology gets.
Absolutely. I think there's some interesting points you've made there. A couple of things. One of them, and I think it's probably been a problem for sort of sci-fi writers and filmmakers since the dawn of time, is the physics involved. Because, you're in space, so you wouldn't hear an explosion, for example. But yet you watch sci-fi films, and of course you hear explosions and gunshots and laser beams and all sorts going off, because it would be really boring if it was just silence, So I suppose there's that dramatic element that you've got to sort of pull in to make that work.
There is. And, it's just a juggling act of deciding how specific do I really need to be? Because that, when in doubt, maybe you just pull back some of the details. As long as you don't do anything that violates it and it feels authentic, then, sometimes you're safe just doing that.
So less is more sort of thing.
Sometimes, especially if you're not certain and you think you might mess it up really badly. Just think about what does the reader need to know, and what would they enjoy knowing, and what is just going to become an unnecessary detail that might trip them up or trip you up.
Yeah. And I suppose every detail you put in is something you've got to be faithful to in the future of the next book and whatever, haven't you? So it's, as you say, it's something that if you forget about it, or it becomes because you could put something in there that could change everything, couldn't you? Like, in one scene, gravity is stronger than it is on Earth, and in another, it's less strong than it is on Earth, and that completely blows the person's, the sort of context of the entire series.
And that was another thing I had to think about. I had a scene where they land on a giant asteroid, and there's an old base there, and I'm like, okay, how is gravity going to work? Is there gravity? Can artificial gravity be created? How do I need to describe it to make people feel like they're there? And so in that respect, it was a lot more work than a lot of the adventure stuff. I do a ton of research with the adventure stuff, but I know how the physics of our planet works and things like that. So a lot of things you take for granted knowing. Yeah,
that's it. I think that framework, whilst some writers could find that limiting, it actually makes it a lot easier, because you're just telling the story, aren't you? You're like, this is Earth, everything's the same, and they're going on an adventure. Boom. I don't need to mention anything else other than those things, Yeah. Do you find that your readers follow you through the series, or do you know that there are certain people who just read such and such a series or such and such a series?
The readers from whom I hear the most are reading in order. My books are written so that they don't have to be. I try to follow the Clive Cussler formula of every one is just an adventure you can pick up. So if you're more interested in the Loch Ness Monster than Bigfoot, or you're more interested in the cities of Cibola than you are about the lost city of Z, then you choose this book over this book. But yeah, there are a lot of people who want to read in order. And then I also hear from people who ask, should I start with the Origins books and read them in chronological order? And I say no, because I didn't write those solo. Those are all co-authors. I'd like for you to start with the ones I wrote. So it seems like most of the readers do start with the Dane Maddock Adventures, read those all the way through, and then I gently nudge them towards some of these spin-off series.
Yeah. And that's the beauty of doing these spin-offs, isn't it? I think when I branch into another series, I'll have to make sure there is enough link between one and the other. That must come with its own challenges, though, tying them together in a way that is believable and, that makes sense to the reader.
Right now, I'm just doing hat tips. It's just the Maddox series is so expansive, and when I was signed to a thing called Kindle Worlds that Amazon used to do. It was where they signed some independent authors and they licensed your universe for other people to write in. And so I signed on with that. A bunch of people wrote books in my universe, and then they shut the program down like a year later. And I felt obligated to republish these authors. So I went back and I rewrote all the books and republished them as co-authored books. And suddenly I've got this wealth of stuff that isn't really cataloged or anything. So I'm not going too deep into it, but I cross over secondary characters and villains, and I make reference to the events of other books and things like that, just to start giving people the the feeling that it's one big universe. But yeah, there's always the planning stage of, okay, now which villain is this person facing most lately,
Mm.
most recently? What's happening in the background? What's the bigger story arc? Is there anything we need to touch? Who in the Maddock universe would be a good combo for this? So it's fun and challenging at the same time.
Yeah, yeah, it sounds it. So it's good. Yeah, it is good fun to sort of net those things together and make them all sort of fit in. And as you say, sort of tipping the hat to it, sort of so and so remembered this thing that they'd done
Yeah.
2 weeks ago, or that reminded them of whatever that thing was. Yeah, yeah. Alison's
One of the
asked.
fun things is that as Dane Maddock travels the world and our other characters travel the world, I now have established characters in different cities and different countries who have specializations, and we can grab those characters if we need to. So if Sam Aston, one of the ones Alan and I write together, are in this city, then hey, I can have him encounter this person, and now we got a new crossover, and it's a character we don't have to build from scratch.
Yeah, I like that. So it's like a little black book. They need a computer expert in New York. Well, I know someone who did that before in this book. They can just be brought out of retirement to come and solve this problem.
Yeah.
I like it. And that's a good idea, actually. Some good thinking.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The challenge is keeping some kind of story Bible because there's just so many characters, and I don't have a good one. My friend Sean Ellis did a lot of work on one up to a certain point, but he has his own career, and the books kept coming. So yeah, we do our best to keep up with everything, but yeah, it's difficult to keep it all straight. And we've had some funny mistakes. Excuse me just a second. Sean was going through notes, and he apparently skipped a paragraph, and he thought that a character was gay who was straight. And he wrote him as overtly gay and gave a little gay subplot in a novella. I'm like, wait, I'm fine with the subplot, but it's wrong for this character. He's like, what? And so we go back and flip through, like, oh, you flipped an extra page, and you saw this. So yeah, you got to be careful with those things.
And then that's such a big thing to have missed, but yet, as you say, you miss a page and it becomes unclear or whatever. Yeah. Interesting stuff. I suppose. I mean, how does that Bible look like? Have you got it in some kind of spreadsheet, or have you actually done that?
He did a giant Word document. For my own use, it's a section of this big ass binder.
Wow.
So yeah, all of this is printouts of the first. Those are summaries of like maybe the first 20 books, and high points and characters and things like that. And then I'm in the process of a spreadsheet, but it takes a long time. And
yeah, I can imagine. Gosh, yeah, that's it. And then you hope, but I mean, you think someone would notice at some point, wouldn't they? If you've done that, someone would read them through. I think this is the thing as a writer, it's quite a long time since you read those earlier books. Even with me, mine were 3 years ago that I published the first one, So that's not as clear in my mind as someone who will read it and then go on to read the next one immediately. You can't, you can't keep all of that information sort of buzzing around all at once, I think.
Yeah. I saw a lot of that play out in the TV show Game of Thrones. I don't know if you followed it at the time, but those of us who watched it from the start, we had to deal with 2-year gaps between seasons at the end, and we had time to really speculate. Oh, it's going to go this way, it's going to go that way, and it was easy to overlook Daenerys' descent into madness because it was so spread out. And so a lot of us were very unhappy with the ending, but my friends who waited until all the seasons were out and watched them straight through were like, dude, it's obvious. She's crazy. She was crazy from the start. How did you not see it? And I think that can be that way with the reading. The people who are flying through the books are catching things that those of us who are spacing them out are not. Somebody on Twitter commented last week that he had read 7 of my books in 8 days. I'm like, oh, okay.
That's amazing.
They are short books, but yeah.
Yeah, that's so good.
Always
that's
nice
a good
to hear
effort.
somebody like you. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, this is the beauty of books, though, I think. And it's why I'm quite glad I've chosen that as my format, because I don't think they date in the same way as TV and other formats do. Yes, of course, some of the ideas, if you read a book now from the 1950s, some of the terminology is dated and the construction of sentences and this sort of thing. But a great story is a great story, isn't it? And when it's told in that sort of way, it can be eternal in many ways.
Mm-hmm. I'm currently rereading a sci-fi series by an English author. I think it's from the early 70s, late 60s, the Tripod series. It's about an invasion of the world where these big aliens in tripods had taken over. And I read it as a kid and loved it. And I went back and I'm rereading. It's been a lot of fun. It's written
Yeah.
on more of a teenage level, but it's still enjoyable after all this time. Some books don't hold up, but I think more often than not, most of them do.
And that's the thing, isn't it? Revisiting them after many years, you see different things in them, don't you? In the characters and the way things are told, and the sort of ideas that are shared in that story.
Yeah, one of the big differences I've noticed in my genre, both in books and movies, is that in the old days, there was a long build up to the beginning of the action. Whether it's these war movies where you assemble your team, or an adventure story like The Lost World, where we have to meet Challenger and be thrown out of the house and hear a lecture. And the authors used to make us witness every step of the buildup, whereas in today's, we would probably start in the Amazon and backfill for a certain paragraph. So I was here with Professor Challenger, the big asshole who threw me out of his room. And I opened the letter from my girlfriend who embarrassed me into going on this adventure, and you would cut out a third of the book by jumping straight into the story. And that's probably one of the biggest things I see with modern movies and TV is that the opening sections of books and movies can sometimes be difficult for me to get through because it's just lots and lots of setup that they're making us watch rather than summarizing for us. And that's one of the biggest differences I've identified.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I think that's the nature of our media frenzy sort of world at the moment, isn't it? If you're not grabbed in the first 5 minutes of a film, you turn it off. You've got 200 others you can watch. Whereas in the 70s or the 80s or the 60s or whatever, you'd either gone to the cinema to watch it and you weren't gonna walk out because you'd lose your money, or it was the only one on that night, or
three channels, there's only one with a movie. So we were
it.
audience. And I think my theory is that writers caught up more quickly because of this thing called skimming through pages. And we've always tried to avoid those things that we know a reader would skim. If it's boring for us to write, it's probably going to be boring for them to read. And then when VHS and then DVDs and now streaming came along, the fast forward button has necessitated that as well, I think.
Yeah, so I think you're absolutely right.
I don't mind it though, because I will skim if I'm rereading a book and it's just too dense in certain places.
Do you? Yeah, I think you're right, and I think that's a good attitude to have about it. Actually, not sort of bemoaning the state of that, because some writers might go, "Oh, I wish I could still write a Dickensian monologue for 6 pages on how the characters put it."
You can do all sorts of things.
The first 14 pages are a description of his house, and then it goes on to describing his mum and his dad and whoever else he lives with, for the next 14. But no, I think you're right.
Watching the Wheel of Time series, and it's very different from the books. They've made a lot of changes in the characters, but we're enjoying the streamlining. They managed to distill the essence of the first book down to one short, I think 12 episode series, and those books are huge. And as they go along, they became more and more dense and more packed with filler. So it's going to be interesting to see how they carry it through, what they drop out. But as someone who loves stories, not just as a writer, it's been interesting for me to look and see what they chose to remove and try to figure out why, because I've reread that series so many times that I know it very well. So yeah, it's fun to see how the writers go about planning in advance. When I get to book 3, I can't use this character, so I just need to chop them off now, or this is going to be a problem later. Just kind of watch what they do to tighten up that storytelling and to see what they find valuable and important.
And the other thing to work when you look at something converted into TV is or purposefully cut into TV. It doesn't happen so much with films that are sort of hashed into the TV format, but is the writing around the commercial break. You will get quite often that beat of the story, won't you? And then it will do that classic thing. I don't know which writer it was who at the end of the chapter had a man walk in with a gun. That happens just before they go to the break.
Whether it's an emotional cliffhanger or an action cliffhanger, but some suspenseful moment that's going to make sure you don't leave when the commercial starts.
That's exactly it. It's an interesting sort of change from the writing that we do, where you don't have that pressure quite so much. Although, of course, we're always aware that we want to sort of drag the reader through the whole book and not to stop at any point.
There's a hair on my screen right over your face, and I just can't take it anymore. So
no, go for it.
All right, there we go.
Got it.
You don't look a lot different, but a little bit.
If yeah, fine, fine. Here's a question for you, and something that that sort of I think about, and I've only written 7 or 8 books, something like that. So a
Only.
tenth of what you have only. Yeah. I'm always conscious that my villain needs to be different, and I'm often worried that they're just like a stock villain from a cartoon. Evil, mad person trying to take over the world, etc. And I'm trying to avoid taking that sort of cookie cutter villain and putting them in my books. How have you managed that, or do you
I
find
do
that
cook.
difficult, or do you not even think about it?
Yeah, it depends on the story. Again, with the novella length, especially in the short pulpy novel, I generally don't explore the villains a ton,
Mm,
unless the story really dictates it. I did a book called Contest a couple years ago where I tied together the adventure race that my friend Sean and I did, the Black Dahlia murders back in the 1940s, the lost ship of the desert in California, and several other Mojave legends. And to make it all work, I had to create here's the entire plot structure for Dane Maddock, the plot structure for the person who was working against him, even though some of those things didn't appear on screen. And then I had to create a plot structure for the historical backstory because I was tying in. I had to figure out how the Black Dahlia and the Lost Ship of the Desert go together and impacted my plot. So sometimes the more involved the plot, I really will take the time. But to me, it's usually about the villain's story. If I can give them an interesting reason that they got to where they are
yeah.
and thing they want to do, that adds some texture to it. But yeah, with a lot of my stuff, I'm writing fast-paced, fun, old-school adventures. So my villains have a motive other than just being bad. I don't do that. One interesting thing was when I started off, I was writing. This was the early 2000s, and Da Vinci Code was a big deal, and it seemed like everyone was doing Catholic villains or Muslim villains. So I said, well, I'm going to do something weird. I'm going to do conservative Christians, and I'm going to do conservative Mormons, and I'm going to make it really clear that they're really right wing, out there, crazy, and I'm going to call them the Dominion. And I had this plot where they slowly infiltrated government. They used religion and religious symbolism to manipulate people. And now I've reached the point where people are writing me saying, how did you know this stuff was going to happen? Because even in America, even like one of the controversial voting things is called the Dominion. And a lot of the stuff I describe is what has happened with Trumpism and the MAGA movement. And sometimes people just write me angry about something. I'm like, dude, publication date on this. If you're feeling butthurt, it's because whatever you like right now is what was going on back then.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, if you give their organization a rationale, then that can save you some work. So the Dominion is always going to work with religious iconography and artifacts and things like that. I have a group called Trident that is more ancient world, ancient aliens, Atlanteans, stuff like that. Then there's another one that does pharmacology, and then another one that does clean energy. It's fun to take your good people and flip them. Alan and I just finished a book called Crocolipse, which is a thriller about a genetically engineered crocodile that gets loose in a SeaWorld type park that's designed for it.
Amazing.
And
Great premise.
and one of the villains is basically, we drew some inspiration from Tiger King. And one of them is actually an environmentalist who is trying to protect animals, but she's gone off the deep end. And that's fun to take your bad person and give them a good motive and flip them. In the book I mentioned, Contest, one of the villains is working for clean water, but he's financing his efforts with human trafficking on the side. So, take an ostensibly good person and think, okay, how could they use their good for evil?
Yeah.
And that is enough. And, you can make them from any walk of life and give them their own little interests and things like that. And look for odd ways that their skills can be useful. How can I make this jogger dangerous? What is it about jogging or whatever?
No, I like that, and I think that makes for a more interesting character than that cookie cutter person that I described before. Because there is an element of what they're doing that can be seen as for the greater good, isn't there? But it's the way they're going about it that's wrong. And I think you see this in a lot of great action films, don't you? The villain is trying to solve the planet by killing the human race, his
Everyone is the
motivations,
hero of
you
their
know.
own story.
Yeah.
And so
So,
they need a reason to believe they're doing the right thing.
mm,
I don't find it interesting just to have a character who wants to watch the world burn. I
mm,
mean, I guess you could mix up the ways in which they choose to burn things, but that's about it. So
yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
make them believe in what they're doing and make them sincere about it and make them conflicted. You know, as I talk, the more I remember that I've probably done better with my villains than I thought. I've, I have Dane Maddock was betrayed by an ex-girlfriend, but she was being manipulated by numerous things, and she pops up from time to time. But I make it very clear because we'll pop into her point of view, and the readers can see her struggle. She's doing the wrong thing, but we get why, and she's
Mm,
doing it for reasons that a lot of us might do. You can make a person do profoundly evil things if you can convince them they're doing it for God, country, or family. That's
that's it, isn't it?
evil people don't kick puppies 24/7. They're generally normal people who can convince themselves it's okay to do this horrible thing here and there. And then I'll
And
go back to living my normal life. I'll go to church and say, "Dear Jesus, please forgive me." And then boom, let's go kill somebody
yeah,
else.
but this is exactly what you're saying. What you're saying is very interesting because a lot of people do horrible things in real life. For I mean, you mentioned the police force. People who are in both of our countries who kill people not on purpose, and they do it for the greater good. They do it because it keeps the peace on the streets and whatever else. We're not going down that argument specifically,
Right. And
but
there are a
you
lot of
could.
layers to that. I was not making light of that when I
Yeah, but
made
you
my
could
remarks.
rephrase that, couldn't you, and have it as that person's the villain because they're killing someone, and you'd be like, well, no, but they did it because there's always these different angles which to explore as an author, I think, is infinitely fascinating.
Yeah. And remember that from the villain's perspective, depending on how you write the story, your hero is a villain. If they're trying, if the
Mm,
antagonist is trying to stop the protagonist from achieving their goals, then the inverse is true.
that's
So
true,
that can
isn't it?
be an interesting
Mm,
thing to examine. Sometimes you can go into the villain's point of view and not reveal that they're the villain and have them witness the actions of your protagonist without naming them just yet because maybe they haven't met and give the readers a slightly different view of what your hero is doing. And that can be a fun way to go back and forth if you keep a tight third person and really get into what they're thinking and feeling.
I like that idea, and I think what you talk about there actually is interesting because you're talking about your hero, the flaws within your hero as well as the good points within your villain. And I think perhaps in those TV programs that we talked about from the 60s and 70s, it was much more clear cut than that. You could tell the hero because they were on a white horse with a spear, and you could tell the villain because they had a hood and they were running around, in the shadows. It was very, very clear as to who was who, wasn't it? But I think in our modern storytelling, it's a lot less so.
Absolutely.
Do you find that your villains roll over from book to book, or are you very clear, or will one be sort of vanquished and go off, or will they come back later and do something else? Do you recycle the
Oh,
same
they can come
the same
back.
groups?
My original plan was not to recycle anyone, but it's too much fun, especially if the reader thinks they're dead. I
Yeah.
had a character who was carried off under a mountain by a group of satyrs, the actual Greek things, and he was going to beat, and he's died before, but I just brought him back again. It's just too fun.
Yeah, just to suspend disbelief a little while longer,
You need to be like you can't have Anakin falling into lava and surviving. That's a bit much. Although a lot of readers will accept just about anything if they love your stories. They don't
Mm,
care much as long as you show them a good time and don't insult their intelligence. But yeah, I
yeah.
like to bring back villains from time to time. I found that's a lot more interesting, and I'm glad that we've done that because now I can cross them over into other series.
And I really like your idea about villains being part of a group. So you've talked about the phrase, I can't remember the one you used, about the sort of religious activists.
Right.
But the benefit of that is you could have a different person who
Right.
is still, so you've essentially got the reason that they're being a villain, but you've just got a different person doing the same thing. So you've killed someone, and their brother or their sister or their friend is now coming back in the same guise as them. Which is
Mhm.
must be a great thing as a writer because all of that stuff already because it's the same as you you know the
Yeah,
same as you
sometimes
wrote in
just
the
from
previous
the
book.
type of plot I'm doing, I immediately know, okay, it's going to be this group,
Mm,
unless I just
mm.
want to invent someone.
Yeah, no, this is fascinating to talk. We've got a few questions in the comments I'd like to have you answer if we can.
Oh, I'm on the
Alison
wrong
says,
page.
Random question. What is one of the most surprising things you've learned about your character Dane along the way of writing him? Because you've obviously met in several books.
His sidekick, Bones Bonebreak, he's a Native American. He surprises me a lot more. He's reckless, single-minded, really jumps in there and does things. Um, when Maddock has surprised me, he is someone who really thinks things through. He was an officer. He feels a responsibility to everyone, and maybe he overthinks a little bit. So when he surprises me is moments when his emotions break through and he just loses his shit and really shows people what he can do. I don't do it very often because, frankly, there are a lot of people writing in the thriller genre who are doing sort of not exactly murder porn, but there are heroes who will track down a terrorist, slice his guts open, and wrap his entrails around. I'm not making that. I was studying some contemporary thrillers for a pitch we were thinking about doing, and I don't do that. But yeah, when you're so deep in the character that they get out of their normal behavior patterns like any person would do. And so I think it's when he really, something from his past, because he does have a past that I've put together, triggers him into um, doing some serious action much deeper than he normally would. He shuts off that overthinking button and just kicks ass.
Yeah. So it surprises you when he does that. You mean
Right,
it's
because that's not his nature. He's the one who's responsible for everybody else and makes the good decision and maybe holds back sometimes out of not exactly an abundance of out of seeing the big picture.
I
But
like that.
in life, you're looking at the thing that matters to you right then in that moment, or the person that matters to you in that moment, and you don't
Mm.
operate in the context.
I think that's interesting because you're there talking about what you that's his dark side. That's his sort of hide side coming out, where, when he gets really angry or when he gets or when he sees a particular thing that triggers him to do that. I think that's a good part of his character. Um, Ray says some co-authored works have each partner writing one chapter, then the other, then sort of swapping chapters over, I
Great
suppose,
question.
during the writing process. How do you blend your co-authored book so it reads like the same voice? Good
That's
question.
one of those processes that has evolved. Started out the first co-author book I did, Alan and I tag teamed the chapters. And we tried to emulate one another's style and vocabulary, but it felt a little disjointed. And we ended up him focusing on certain characters and me focusing on certain ones so that the voice change wasn't too jarring. The next book we did, he would write a chapter. I would pass over that chapter, write the next. He would pass over my chapter. When we got finished, we gave it to a friend of ours who's very successful in the genre. He said, "There's no voice anymore. It doesn't sound like either one of you. You guys have got to figure something out. It's too much." So we've come to the system that I alluded to earlier, where we talk about the story together. I develop the very thorough outline. Alan writes the first draft so that it's really his voice, and then I make the pass over it to play with the language and remove the 874 fucks that he put in there. Punctuation. And so it ends up being more his voice, but my storytelling style. And then I especially look at the American language since he's English Australian.
That's an interesting point, isn't it? Because
That's where we are now. That's with Alan. With most of the other co-authors, it's pretty much I write the outline and similar deal with the exception of Sean Ellis, who knows the characters like the back of his hand. And he says, "Hey, I like this idea." I say, and he writes it, and then I make a pass over it to make it sound a little like me and see if I have any cool ideas. But mostly Sean's the free agent of the crowd.
love it. What part of the process do you enjoy the most then when you're either working solo or working with someone else? What part really sort of vibes you to get up and get
Finding the
writing?
really cool and fascinating and unusual stories, finding the interesting characters from history, the local legends that people don't know about. When I first started writing, I thought, well, once I've done Ark of Covenant and Noah's Ark and a few of those others, I won't have anything left to write about. Wrong. Everywhere you go has so many local
Yeah.
legends and adds so much richness and depth to the story, and it gives you cool ideas. So that is the part to me is discovering all the conspiracy theories and legends or authentic things that happened in history, presidents who sent out secret missions looking for certain things or hidden agendas or old documents. All of that can be a lot of fun. And the readers love when you can give them something and they look it up and it's actually real and you made it work.
Yeah, absolutely. It does make you feel like there's a sort of it makes you feel like the reading's important when it's a little bit true. And I think that's something that Dan Brown always did fantastically well, wasn't it? You felt like you were being taught something just by clinging on to the coattails of his main character. You know, that you'd.
What's funny is I remember flying through Da Vinci Code, and then when I went back and read it again, I don't know, his storytelling conceit is he stops the action of the story and does a flashback to the classroom, and he literally teaches you. And then we go, and then flashback, back to the classroom. And that was kind of funny because I didn't remember that. It was same with Starship Troopers. I remembered it being such an exciting book, and then I reread it. It's like, they should call it Starship Pontificators. It's just action lectures about patriotism and duty. So,
yeah, you're right. And I'm not sure that either of us would do that in quite that same way, because a scene in a classroom or a scene when he's, as you say, there was one I remember, it stops the action and it cuts to him on a train thinking about something. For pages and pages and pages, he's just thinking about something. And I would just think, this is really boring. You know what I mean? I wouldn't put that in one of my books, because I'd think, you know, he's on a train looking out the window. We've already had a conversation about picking places, interesting things going, you know, like putting that sort of dramatic tension in the book. But he just goes, no, I'm down round.
yeah,
I need to, you know.
I don't think the book reread well, but I think on the first read, it's the fascination of learning that makes it feel like a fast read, when really the storytelling style can be quite slow. Walk around, look at this painting, escape, flashback. Walk around, look at this, escape, flashback. But on the first read, I'm learning so much that I didn't know, and visiting so many places I've never heard of or never seen, that it makes it feel like a fast read. I just don't like the stories on the second go around.
Yeah, it is. And you've got to point out that one of his books is about 3 of ours in length. You know,
Maybe my novellas anyway.
Yeah, I think they're chunky, aren't they? Really big book. But yeah. David, this has been absolutely fantastic. I've loved chatting and watching you drink beer. Damn it.
All right, one more just for you. Here we go. Cheers.
There you go. Cheers. So where can we find you, and what book would you recommend someone, if someone's never met you before, what book would you think for them to start with?
Well, let's see. If you want a little bit more grown-up language and straight-up thrillers, dark, I would jump into the stuff Alan and I write. This is called Primordial. This is a story about an ancient surviving dinosaur in a Finnish lake. And those are a lot of fun. And then if you want my solo stuff, my tagline is classic adventure for the modern reader. I write with a more modern style, but it's the old school stuff. And I would, if you look on my website, I have a reader's guide that breaks down everything. So with Dane Maddock, depends on whether you want giant snakes, do you want lost treasure, do you want Bigfoot? My book Lock, which is Loch Ness Monster related, that hit the USA Today bestseller list, and it's fairly short. So that might be one to try if you want to get your toe wet. That one's a lot of fun.
David, this is absolutely fantastic. Have an amazing day, and I can't wait to connect with you again, hopefully in person, either on this side of the pond or that side. I don't know.
Come on over. We have room.
Will do. Thanks so much. See you again. Bye, mate. Bye.